The 2020 F1 season is finally in full swing, and I think it's fair to say Ferrari hasn't had the easiest start to proceedings. From Charles Leclerc wiping himself and teammate Sebastian Vettel out at the start of one of the Austrian Grand Prix, to the car itself just not being quick enough, the prancing horse is more of a drunken donkey at the moment. They're languishing in the midfield, and that's not where Ferrari should be. Those famous red cars should be fighting for race victories, not battling for 13th place. So what should they do? Well, I've had a genius idea. Ferrari can boast countless successful cars from its illustrious history, so why not just use one of them instead? It can't be any worse than how they're doing now, so all we need to decide is which of their mighty machines from the past they should revert to. Let's cue the intro and begin our experiment. Right, the plan for this is to take the 22 different Formula 1 games on the PlayStation, do a lap in a Ferrari on each of them, and see which is the fastest. We're starting in 1995, and as you can see, I've chosen Interlagos as the venue for this hugely scientific test. There's some very important and well thought out reasons why I've picked Brazil for this, but I'll get into that a bit later on. First, let's talk about F1 1995, because if I don't explain something now, it will compromise my integrity for this entire video. You may have noticed that the timer in the game doesn't quite match up with the timer I've added in at the bottom of the screen. I've mentioned this before in one of my other videos, but for those of you who don't know, the timer in this game is completely wrong. Basically, it's going too fast, and the further we go into this lap, the more out of sync it gets. I've no idea why it does that, and it only seems to affect 1995. But it means you should ignore the in-game stopwatch entirely for this one, because our first lap time is going to be significantly faster than what it says, so I'll use the other clock to estimate a more accurate lap time. There, now I've gone through all that, you won't think I'm a filthy liar. The rest of the in-game stopwatches are a bit more accurate, so we shouldn't have this problem again. And we have our first lap completed at 1 minute 17.920, or somewhere in that ballpark. There's no time to waste, let's jump straight into 1997. There's no game on the PlayStation based on the 1996 season, so I'll have to ignore that one. As I said, this test is hugely scientific. This is the car that Michael Schumacher almost won the 97 championship in, until he got a little bit deliberately crashy towards the end. Still, it was an amazing feat to drag this car into title contention. As for the 97 game, this is probably my favourite of the older generation. It was easy to control and a lot of fun to play, and generally just a very well made sequel to the previous one. That's not to say it couldn't be frustrating, because if you put a wheel just 1 nanometer onto the grass, you end up losing all control and spinning off. I ruined countless laps doing that, and as a result ended up calling this game all sorts of obscene names. F's, C's, T's, pretty much every swear word going. Piece of f***ing crap pile of arse. Eventually though, I managed to complete a clean one, and I was actually quite pleased with it. I really did try and set decent laps on all of these games to ensure these lap times are vaguely meaningful, although some are definitely a bit more decent than others. Anyway, this will be a 1:10.392, more than 7 seconds quicker than 95. We now have a proper benchmark. From the joy of 97 to the misery of 98. I've moaned about this game several times before already. In summary, it's crap. So I'm going to take this opportunity to explain why I chose Interlagos for this test. There's only been a handful of tracks that have been a constant feature on the F1 calendar over the last 25 years, and obviously I needed one I could use on each game. But on top of that, you also have to eliminate the ones which have seen noticeable changes. Silverstone, for instance, is a completely different circuit today than it was 20 years ago. Then you get tracks like Monza and Spa that are largely the same, but one corner has been redeveloped. At Monza it's the first chicane, and at Spa it's the bus stop. Hungary too. Turn 12 didn't always look how it does now, so they're no good. Montreal seems like a good bet, until you remember in 95 they had that clumsy chicane halfway down the main straight. It was part of the efforts to slow cars down following the fatal crashes at Imola a year earlier, but it means it's no good for this. Essentially, there's only 2 tracks which are on all the PlayStation games and where the layout hasn't changed too much since the mid-90s. One is Interlagos and the other is Suzuka. Interlagos is shorter and easier, so I picked that one. Back to our laps, a 98 finish with a 1:16 something or other, so let's ignore it and move on to 99. The previous 3 games didn't have any competition, well, on the PlayStation at least. There were other F1 games around, like the Jeff Crammond Grand Prix series, but they were on the computer. However, there were 3 F1 games released on the PlayStation based on 1999. There was F1 World Grand Prix by Video System, F1 Racing Championship by Ubisoft, and the one you're looking at now, Formula 1 99. We had never been so spoilt for choice, and it was certainly a welcome development after being lumped with the below par 98 effort. As it happens, Formula 1 99 was a big improvement on its predecessor. The car was drivable again, unlike last year where I could barely keep it pointing the right way. This is also our first championship winning Ferrari, as they managed to win the Constructors that year and end a 16-year-long drought. Eddie Irvine almost won the driver's title as well, but ultimately came up a couple of points short against Mika Hakkinen. Now I could have done laps on each of the 99 games, but I decided to stick with just doing the main series to keep it consistent, the Psygnosis and Studio Liverpool games, and obviously the Codemasters ones later on. Anyway, that's why you won't see the EA games in this video. Our latest time of a 1:13.040 goes into second place as we head into the new Millennium. This is where the era of dominant Ferraris begins, which would see the team and Michael Schumacher win the next 5 Constructors and Drivers titles. It would be a good bet then that the car we ultimately recommend Ferrari use for the rest of the 2020 season comes from one of these. Let's wait and see. The 2000 car has got off to a good start, as it was fractionally up in the first sector on our current first place effort from 97. Like the 99 game, this one was quite easy to get the hang of. Overall, I did find it tricky moving quickly from one game to the next, as each one has a different feel, and takes some getting used to. I only spent about 15 to 20 minutes on each game, otherwise this would have taken me all year, and Ferrari need help now. We're still slightly ahead at the second sector, there's just 2 tenths in it, and we're set for an exciting finish. Well, it would be exciting for me if I didn't already know that it ends up 3.5 tenths slower. Maybe it's not quite as fast in a straight line, maybe my final corner was a bit rubbish, but it's another competitive time nonetheless. Into 2001 now, and this is the crossover of the PlayStation 1 and the PlayStation 2. This game actually came out on both, and I've used the PS1 version here for a very important reason. I don't own the other one. This is also the last game which would feature Murray Walker providing the commentary, as he would retire at the end of the year. Murray's commentary was a huge part of the early F1 games, treating us to memorable lines like these.
And he takes the checkered flag, happy in the knowledge that he's first past the checkered flag. Was that a bit of argy-bargy there, Martin?
You're right there, Murray.
It's a shame in a way that Codemasters have done away with commentary during the race in the more recent games. You get Crofty and Anthony Davidson at the start and the end, but during the races themselves you're forced to put up with just Jeff. Unless you tell him to shut up, of course. Maybe you prefer it being as it is now, so you feel like you're actually driving in the race rather than watching it on TV. I don't know, it might be nice to at least have the option of proper commentary so you can switch between them. Never mind, at least you get the joys of my fabulous commentary during these Ferrari laps. Speaking of which, another time's been posted and it's a 1:11 for 2001 to slot into third place. Now it's time for the 2002 car, which was one of the most dominant cars in Formula 1 history. Out of 17 races that season, Michael Schumacher and Rubens Barrichello won 15 of them. Schumacher finished on the podium at every single race and had the title wrapped up in July. July? That's insane! There were still 6 races left! Ferrari would finish the year with 221 points, the same number as all the other teams added together. Such a world-beating car deserves to be depicted in a top-quality game then, right? Well, this one's a bit weird. The way the back slides around, looking like it's about to spin every time you mildly nudge the analog stick, is really bizarre. I don't know if it's something you can fix by twiddling around with the setup. With all of these games though, I've not done that, I've just gone out and driven the lap, so it wouldn't have been fair to make an exception here. Besides, I don't even know if that would have solved anything. However, from being a second down at the end of the first sector, it's made up a lot of ground to be almost level at sector 2. Could we finally be about to see the 1997 car dislodged from its perch at the top of the standings? Ooh, not quite. In fact, it's only gone into third place. I seem to be making a habit of losing all my lap time coming up the hill. Moving on to 2003 now, can this be the car to beat the 1997 lap time of a 1:10.3? Well, as you can see in the top right of the screen that I'd already set a 109.9 prior to starting this lap, it's looking like the answer might be yes. Whoops, that was a bit of a cock-up to ruin the drama. Sorry about that. Anyway, we need to focus on the second sector of this lap, because the detective in me suspects something is up here. First off, it's worth remembering that this lap was 9/10ths down at the end of Sector 1. Now if you cast your mind back to the 2002 lap, that was also down in the first sector, but made up a bucket load of time on our current fastest in Sector 2. And as we come up to the end of Sector 2 here, we're now 2.2 seconds clear. Where did that come from? After comparing some of the laps, I think it's because this game, and the last one to some extent, have made the second sector faster. The corners aren't as tight, so you can keep the power on for longer. Very cheeky. And it means 2003 obliterated the 97 time by 2.5 seconds. Now I've had a word with the race stewards and somewhat controversially they've allowed that lap to stand. So there you go, that's our new benchmark. You've got to say though that 2004 should be right up there and might even be able to challenge straight away. For a long time the cars from this year were the fastest in F1 history, setting the lap records at pretty much every track going. Those lap records have only started being beaten in the last few years, so it's fair to say that these cars are quick. The Ferrari was again pretty good this year as well. This was the season where Schumacher won 12 of the first 13 races and would comfortably claim his 7th and final driver's title. Ferrari would also win a 6th straight Constructors' Championship, however it would also mark the end of their run of dominance. Sadly for this car as well, it seems like the developers have sorted out their Sector 2 problems, as we've gone from being a 10th up to 5 seconds down. However, that's also partly down to this game being a bit of a pig to control. I've not exactly set a mesmerising lap on this one, but the handling on the F1 games of this era was horrible. It was so bad that I didn't really play them growing up. I bought them, tried them out, decided I didn't like it, put it back on the shelf, and went back to the EA version of F1 2002. That was until 2005 came out, and I quite liked that one. It was, to me anyway, a massive improvement on what had come before. It was also quite a momentous year in Formula 1, proper F1 as opposed to virtual F1. It seemed everyone had had enough of Ferrari winning everything, and new tyre rules had been brought in to try and reduce their powers. To put that into context, Ferrari were the only top team using the Bridgestone tyres, the others were on Michelin's. For 2005, it had been decided that one set of tyres had to last the entire race, and Michelin did a much better job at that than their Japanese rival over the course of the season. Well, there was the notable exception of Indianapolis, where all the Michelin runners withdrew from the race at the end of the formation lap on safety grounds. Michelin couldn't guarantee their tyres could last the race distance without exploding, resulting in the farcical 6-car race that would prove to be Ferrari's only win in a difficult season. The fallout from Indianapolis would see Michelin pull out of the sport entirely at the end of 2006, and we've only had one tyre manufacturer at a time ever since. The idea of using one set of tyres a race was also abandoned. Knowing all of that, I think we'll have to blame the tyres for this lap only being 7th best, and swiftly move on to the next one. As you can immediately see from the change in the graphics, we've moved from the PlayStation 2 to the PlayStation 3. It seems the Brazilian organisers decided to upgrade the circuit into high definition. F106 originally came out on the PS2, but it was remastered as F1 Championship Edition, which was one of the first titles to be released on the PS3. This was also the last F1 game to be made by Sony in Studio Liverpool. Their exclusive license with F1 expired before the start of 2007, and for whatever reason they decided not to renew it. This would result in no F1 game based on 2007 or 2008 being released. Devastating! Codemasters acquired the license sometime in 2008, but fans would have to wait until the following year for the next instalment. What that meant for me is 3 years of playing Championship Edition, and I actually got quite good at it as a result. I was winning races online, and almost won the title on career mode in a Toyota on the hardest difficulty. Sadly, the talent I once possessed on this game has long disappeared. Going back to the PS3 controller, you realise how crap it is compared to the PS4, and I found it difficult to adjust. I think I did better with my half-broken PS2 controller. We can only set a lap time of a 1:15.8, and with that, it's time to delve into the Codemasters era. Now we've jumped straight into 2010, yet there was a game in 2009. That one though was only released on the Wii and PSP. People who had proper consoles would have to wait a bit longer before they would get their next F1 game. I don't have a Wii or a PSP, and never had one of them at the time either. I've only ever played F1 2009 on a friend's PSP about a decade ago, and I don't really remember much about it. Obviously though, if I don't have the game I can't set a lap on it, which means this entire video is incomplete and effectively ruined, and all I can say is I'm really sorry that I've let you all down. To be honest though, the 2009 Ferrari was a bit ropey and probably wouldn't challenge our top times here anyway, so let's quickly talk about 2010. After a 3-year wait, I was happy just to see a new F1 game released, but as it happened this one was pretty decent. I like the single player game, especially the career mode, and that's where I spent most of my time, but online was great fun too. It does seem though that we've moved from the extreme oversteer of F1 2002 to what felt like chronic understeer on this one, so again it was tricky to get the hang of. Again, it's probably down to me ignoring anything to do with the setup, but those are the rules that I made up earlier, and society as we know it would crumble without rules. A 112.1 puts 2010 bang in the middle of our timing chart for the moment, so let's see how 2011 fares. This is the year that DRS was first introduced. Blimey, I didn't realise it had been that long already. If you cast your minds back, you'll remember it was brought in partly because Fernando Alonso got stuck behind Vitaly Petrov at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix in 2010, and lost the championship as a result. He followed the Renault for lap after lap in his much faster Ferrari, but simply couldn't find a way past. DRS solves the problem of F1 cars not working when running behind another car by making overtaking on the straights a piece of piss, but a lot of people would be happy to see the back of it. 9 years later though, and the same problem still largely exists, so DRS remains a vital part of the sport. Personally, I'd be happy to see it disappear, but while the basic issue remains, it needs to stay. That's not to say though that a faster car being stuck behind a slower one makes for a boring race. Think of Schumacher and Alonso's battle at Imola in 2005. The final lap saw Schumacher desperately try and get past, but Alonso held on to take the win. That was properly exciting stuff, even with ITV cutting to an advert break mid-battle and missing most of it. Good job. In the meantime though, the 2011 car actually set quite a competitive lap. 110.757 puts it into 4th place, less than 200ths of a second behind 2000. Now we move on to the 2012 Ferrari, a year that Alonso managed to get a car which had no business being in championship contention into championship contention. That was definitely true at the start of the year, as the team struggled for pace on what was a very competitive grid. 7 different drivers won the first 7 races, including one for Alonso, who by mid-season found himself somehow comfortably ahead in the title standings. 4 straight victories for Sebastian Vettel would see him move ahead, and an impressive recovery drive at the finale in Interlagos saw him clinch the title over Alonso by just 3 points. This remains the last time that drivers from 2 different teams have taken the title fight all the way to the last race. Unless something goes dramatically wrong for Mercedes, that run is set to continue for a little while longer yet. As for the constructors, Ferrari weren't in the running mainly because of Felipe Massa's miserable start to the year. He did improve drastically in the second half though, and after the summer break was only outscored by Alonso, Vettel and Jenson Button. Massa's upturn in form was rewarded with being signed for an 8th successive season with Ferrari. Even Vettel won't manage that. A 113.8 is meh, nothing special. So next up is the 2013 Ferrari, the year which saw the last V8 powered engines compete in F1. Big changes are on the way for 2014, which would see turbocharged hybrid V6s enter the fray. The last time the sport had seen such a big engine change was at the end of 2005, when the V10s were all retired. As such, it was an interesting year in Formula 1. A lot of things were going to change, and it was very much the end of an era. For instance, 2013 was also the year when Alonso won his final race, although as he's coming back with Renault, who knows, he might return to the top of the podium again. And it was the end of the Red Bull period of domination, although it finished in style as Vettel managed an incredible 9 race wins in a row in the second half of the season. To put that into perspective, Hamilton's personal best is 5, and Schumacher's is 7. But we don't care about Red Bull, this video is about Ferrari, and their hybrid engine is about to be left in the dark ages in comparison to the upcoming Mercedes spaceship. So as this lap comes to an end with a 1:15 point useless, I can't imagine the 2014 time will be much better. But let's get back to talking about the games for a second, because I haven't said very much about these early Codemasters titles so far. To be honest, I don't remember very much about them. We've reached the time where I wasn't able to play these games continuously like I was in the late 90s and early 2000s, because I'm all grown up now and work's getting in the way of my PlayStation playing. So I don't really have very much to say about them. I still played them all a fair bit, but once the next year's game came out, the old one went back in the box and probably hasn't been played since. Well, until I made this video, of course. I don't recall any of them being especially bad, but equally none stand out as being amazingly good. I've got fond memories of the 2011 game because of an awesome career mode I had in the Sauber, but that's about it. The only memory I have of F1 2014 is the disc getting stuck in my PS3 and having to take it round to my uncle's house to recover it. Happily it was unharmed, although the PS3 tragically succumbed to its injuries. I've never felt much desire to fire up one of these games again either, like I did with the older ones. That's the nostalgia factor for you. Maybe I'll be more inclined to in another 10 years time. Anyway, this one brings us to the end of the PS3 era, and we will see out the rest of this experiment on the PS4. So let's crack on with 2015. Get ready for the big jump in graphics and voila, 2015. I think everyone remembers this one. It wasn't Codemasters' finest attempt, to put it mildly. The gameplay itself wasn't awful, and you can definitely have some fun with it. It was just there wasn't much game there to begin with. The most glaring omission was the career mode, which had been a staple of every F1 game since 2004. Gone was the opportunity to race as yourself and work your way up to the top teams. Instead, all you could do was pick a driver and race as them for a season. I mean, that's something you'd settle for back on the PlayStation 2, but not for the first F1 game on a brand new, state-of-the-art console. Two-player mode had vanished as well, something that had been on almost all the previous games. While career mode would return in 2016, two-player mode has only just reappeared on F1 2020. They did chuck in the entire 2014 season onto F1 2015, probably to beef it up a bit, but does anyone really want to race with last year's drivers on the newest game? I certainly didn't. Maybe this lightweight version of F1 was as a result of adapting to a new console and working to an earlier release date than in previous years. I don't know, but happily F1 2016 was a big improvement when that came out. As we approach the finish line for this lap, we will record a time of a 1:11.965 to go into 7th place. We're still a long way off 2003's 1:07 though. However, F1 cars have been speeding up in recent years, and I'll give you a mini spoiler that all the cars from now on do go quicker than that 2015 lap. Will any of them be enough to dislodge our current champion? Well, you will have to be patient, as there's 5 cars left to go, including the one you're watching now, which is 2016. Alternatively, you could just skip to the end, but if you've got this far you may as well stick with it. I won't keep you too much longer. Of all the Ferraris we've looked at so far, this is just one of 2 that never managed to win a race, with the other being 2014. That was mainly because Mercedes were just so far ahead of everyone else in 2016, and only failed to win 2 races themselves all year. Vettel and Raikkonen did manage a handful of podiums with it though, so it wasn't all bad. Neither was the game. The career mode made a welcome return and was extended to cover 10 seasons instead of 5. It also brought in the R&D department, so now there was a genuine reason to take part in free practice. If you're like me, you'd never done a practice session in your life before F1 2016 came out. As we complete the lap, it's a 1:11.8, which will just nudge it in front of 2015. We're now up to 2017, and a car which you could say elevated Ferrari right back to the front again. They hadn't really been genuine title contenders since 2012, and had only picked up a handful of victories since then. Vettel won the opening race in Australia and finished on the top 2 steps of the podium in the first 6 races of the year. Things were looking good up until the summer break, following which Hamilton took wins in Belgium and Italy, and then Singapore happened. Vettel had dominated qualifying and should have been set for an easy victory, but a now infamous start line collision with Verstappen and teammate Raikkonen took them all out of the race. Amazingly, it was the first time in Ferrari's history that both cars had retired on the opening lap, and to make matters worse for the Italian team, it allowed Hamilton to pinch a win that all weekend he had not looked like taking. Hamilton's lead in the championship shot up from 3 points to 28, and effectively spelled the end of Vettel's title aspirations. The Mercedes driver would add another 25 points to that at the Japanese Grand Prix when Vettel retired early with electrical problems, and he sealed the title shortly afterwards in Mexico. Raikkonen had a more difficult season, although he was able to steal 4th in the standings from Daniel Ricciardo with a 4th place at the last race of the season in Abu Dhabi. The 2017 car certainly had potential, and with a bit more luck and a bit less crashing, it might have been a championship winner. It's only good enough for 6th place on our list though. It would be a similar story in 2018 for Ferrari, yet this time their car was even more competitive. Many people argued it was better than the Mercedes. Once again, Vettel got off to a strong start, winning the opening 2 races this time, but the Singapore moment of 2018 would actually come at Hockenheim, as Vettel slid off the track in slippery conditions while in the lead. And again, Hamilton was able to pinch victory, having come through from a lowly 14th on the grid. Silly spins would plague Vettel for the rest of the season, and in the end he finished a big old chunk of points behind Hamilton. More so than 2017, it was a lost opportunity for Ferrari. This was definitely one of the strongest cars to come out of Maranello in years, so who knows, maybe this is the one they need to revert to for 2020. Focusing back on our test, it was the only car to set a sub 17 second time in Sector 1, but it's dropped behind again in Sector 2. None of these cars can get close to 2003 in that second sector, confirming my suspicions earlier that there was definitely something fishy about that lap. It's a decent effort from 2018 though to become only the second car to break the 1 minute 10 barrier, and put itself into second place. So we come on to our last old Ferrari, which of course is last year's Ferrari. This one was alright, but it didn't deliver on the promise it showed in pre-season testing. This is the one with the warp speed engine that allowed the car to go about 1,000,000 miles an hour on the straights. In fact, it was too good on the straights, and it seems there was some dodgy business going on behind the scenes, although Ferrari and the FIA are doing a good job of keeping all that quiet. Let's quickly go back to the games for a second though. Since 2016 they've been getting better and better, with more and more new features being added in. For instance, 2019 was the first game where the drivers started moving around to other teams. It was also the first one to include Formula 2, and introduced us to our new Bezzy mates Devon Butler and Lucas Weber. On my career mode, Weber and Haas became more dominant than Hamilton and Mercedes. They maxed their development out a full season before anyone else, and there was nothing me and Renault could do to stop them bossing both championships every year. Back to the 2019 lap, and that time's not good enough to change things at the top, so let's see how the current car compares for our final lap here. Even though it's been struggling in real life, I would expect it to be somewhere at the top of our standings. So we're either going to be recommending to Mr. Binotto that they use the 2003 car, or persevere with this one. It's another quick Sector 1 time, only the second one to break 17 seconds, but it's Sector 2 that's crucial. Can it get anywhere near the 2003 cheatiness? I'll say quickly that I'm really enjoying the new game. Setting up and running your own team is a nice touch to shake the career mode up a bit, and for the first time I'm actually more interested in winning the Constructors' Championship than the Drivers' title. As much as I've got a soft spot for the older F1 games, especially those from before 2002, the newer ones are definitely my favourites. It's been fascinating while making this video to realise quite how much they've improved in terms of graphics, sounds, game features, everything. As expected, we're now a second behind at Sector 2, so let's see what this engine really has up the hill. Has it got enough to beat 2003? Coming up to the finish line, is it going to be faster? Here we go! No, it isn't. In fact, it lost another tenth of a second in the final sector, meaning the new car finishes in second place. So 2003, with its questionable lap, ends the day on top, and as such we'll be insisting that Ferrari scrap the 2020 car with immediate effect and bring back this one. If we look at the final results, we can see that 2003 was 1.2 seconds faster than anything else. That 1.2 seconds would have been enough for Leclerc to get pole in Austria, and for both Ferraris to be right up there with Mercedes in Hungary, so it seemed like it's a no-brainer. In all seriousness though, a lot of my laps had scruffy moments, and with more practice all of them could be improved, so we might need a bit more testing before we report back to Maranello. If you have any of these games and haven't got anything better to do, see if you can improve on any of my times. It shouldn't take too much effort to do so. I know for a fact that the 2020 Ferrari can go faster, as Leclerc managed it on my career mode the other day. He did a 1:7.993, just a smidge off my 2003 lap time here. And that was only on 90% difficulty, so it can definitely go quicker still. Anyway, I hope you found that somewhat interesting. It's always fun to compare the old games to one another. All that's left for me to say is thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.